Welcome to the Close the Chapter podcast. I am Kristen Boyce, a licensed marriage and family therapist with a private practice, Pathways to Healing Counseling. Through conversations, education, strategies, and shared stories, we will be closing the chapter on all the thoughts, feelings, people, and circumstances that don't serve you anymore and open the door to possibilities and the real you. You won't want to miss an episode, so be sure to subscribe. Welcome to this week's Close the Chapter podcast. We are going to be talking about how to work through burnout today. If you are feeling exhausted, worn out, unmotivated, sick of the day-to-day grind, you're going to want to listen to today's episode. We talk all about how to work through it, how to identify burnout, some personal stories of our experience with burnout, because most people have experienced this on some level in some area of their life. It's an important topic to really start conversations around. Maybe you want to talk about it with your partner or a friend or coworkers or a boss. Start naming it and recognizing the impact it's having on your nervous system, your emotions, your thoughts, your feelings, all areas of your life. And I want to introduce you to my guest today, recently recognized by the New York City Journal as top life coach to watch out for in 2022. Amy Mangueira helps people all over the world live burnout free by bringing clarity, direction, positive habits into their lives by filling the gap between where they are now and where they want to be. A four-time entrepreneur with successful acquisitions under her belt, Amy has turned her focus to Humans First Coaching, a coaching network dedicated to guiding over 300 leaders and organizations on how to build healthy cultures, reduce burnout, take care of themselves, and put their employees first. She also has a custom jewelry company that creates fine jewelry for runners, Victoria Co. Amy is also an author. Her book, The Path to Break Free from Burnout, is set to release in early 2023. She's also an avid runner, which we're going to talk about, including a world record marathon holder. So we dive deep into these topics, into her journey with burnout. How did she start recognizing it? What was her rock bottom moment? And if you want support in this area of burnout, you can get the free healing guide. It's a journal and you can reuse it multiple times. You can grab that at Kristen, Kristen, Boyce, BOICE.com/free resources. And you can get that emailed to you. Also follow along on social media at Kristen D. Boyce on Instagram, Facebook, and then TikTok, which is, as y'all know, new to me, at Kristen Boyce, and Twitter at Kristen Boyce, and Pinterest. The main takeaways for today, I want you to write them down and think about one thing you're going to implement in your life to make change. So it's one thing to listen to the podcast. It's another to integrate change into your life. And maybe you need an accountability partner, someone that also wants to set healthier boundaries, really work on not taking on too much where your nervous system is going to scream at you. So share this with somebody that may be experiencing burnout too. And you can talk about the podcast, have deeper conversations. Maybe you want to share it in your work environment or maybe at home where you might need some more help. Let's have deeper conversations. Most people right now are starving for deeper connection. And I hope this podcast can be a catalyst to create more of what you want. So without further ado, here is my in-depth conversation with Amy on burnout. I hope you enjoy. Welcome to this week's Close the Chapter podcast. I am so grateful you are joining us today for this important conversation around burnout. I have had so many clients really struggling with burnout. And I'll have to confess, I think all of us at some point in our lives feel burned out, whether we're going through grief, maybe a loss, trauma, maybe we're overstressed with work and family systems. There's so many reasons why we're burned out. So I'm so excited to have my guest on today who is coming out with a new book that you're going to want to go grab because pre-sales matter in the book world. And so we're going to put the link down in the show notes. The Path to Break Free from Burnout is her new book. Amy, and I want to make sure I say it right, Mangueira. Did I get it okay?
You got it.
Welcome, Amy, to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Kristen. This is so exciting.
You're doing important work in the world, especially now more than ever. I think anytime throughout the generations, we look at burnout and how it impacts family systems, us personally, and our families. How did you get started on this journey of working through burnout?
Yeah, so I would confess that I'm definitely a workaholic and a chaser of busy. And so I would say getting to burnout myself was a total rock bottom moment of 4.5 years of just grinding and listening to this hustle culture that we tend to hear everywhere. And I'm kind of a serial entrepreneur. So I've gone from like business to business to business. And so it took a rock bottom for me, which actually resulted in some interesting health issues too. I lost the hearing in my left ear completely. And that was actually the rock bottom moment where my body was like, if you're not going to slow down, Amy, I'm going to make you right now. And so I lost, and we can totally dig into that more. I see your face. You're like,
yes, I'm like, yeah, tell me more. How did you lose your hearing?
Yeah. So I lose the hearing in my ear, just popped randomly one day. I was on a run like I always am, and my ear popped. And of course, I thought probably was a rupture. I went to the doctor and they said, yeah, we probably think you have a hole in your ear or whatnot. Well, it turns out after getting blood work, my white blood cells were 4 times the amount that a human should have, to the point of we're looking at, did I have leukemia brewing? My body had so much inflammation from the unmanaged stress of this burnout cycle I was in. Doctor's orders were, hey, you lost your hearing. There's nothing you can do about it. You will never hear words again in the left side, but you now can learn to manage your stress. And from that very moment, I went on my own quest to be, okay, I need to heal myself, but can I also create a framework while I'm going through this to help other people? That's what ends up in my book. And I was actually blessed to be able to test it with some other corporations and some folks to see, does this really work for other people too? So luckily, I've had a lot of learnings from my burnout that will help others. But nevertheless, it's been a real murky, scary roller coaster for sure.
Wow. I have so many questions. The first one is, since you like a world record marathon holder, I mean, am I getting that? Tell me about that first of all.
Yeah. So I started running marathons actually to process a divorce, an 18-year relationship back in 2016. And so I kind of jumped into running as just a way to process this because I had a son. There was a lot of emotions and I was a business owner. I couldn't just crumble. So I had to figure it out. So I started marathon running. I slowly joined this really interesting, it's called the 6 World Majors. It's this 3 overseas, 3 in the United States. And it's this quest to complete all 6. There's under 1,000 people that have ever done it. Very few women. I think there's 300 women. I decided I was going to really commit to doing this. And it's taken me, I will finish this March. I will finish all of them in Japan, of all places. I'm so excited. Running was the outlet to process. And I lost this hobby. I started this and I loved the hobby of running, but in the burnout trenches, I did lose the love for running. It became another thing to do because I had already committed to this feat. And I'm sure it added additional stress instead of it being the way that I would find spiritual outlet. And so, yeah, I'm really excited about this journey. It gets to end soon. It's a really great accomplishment. But yeah, being a marathon runner has been a great way to challenge myself physically, being able to process all of the things we have to go through.
Okay, there's so much to unpack in this. Did you have your awakening while you're running these marathons? Was that part of the rock bottom you're calling? Were you running during this time, or is this a separate time?
That is the greatest question ever. So coincidentally, my running this World Major series aligns beautifully to all of the buildup of burnout. I think that I would account, let's say 2017 to the start of this burnout phase. I mean, this is not something that happens overnight. I do want listeners to know that it is a culmination of years and years and unmanaged stress. Okay. So yes, I am doing this journey and starting this busy hustle, this all at the same time. Your body has a way of whispering to you. And I think a lot of the times we ignore the whispers and then suddenly it screams. My body has screamed 3 times. And the third time I lost my hearing. But the second time I was running the London Marathon. And I will never forget it. Mile 3 came and I started hysterically crying. We're talking about not like, oh, this is painful. Why am I doing this? It was an emotional release of all of the stress and the frustration that I was suppressing day over day over day. Kristen, I've never cried like this before. I was hysterical. I could hardly breathe. And here I am trying to carry on for 26 miles. It stopped a couple of times, but I like to tell folks I ran about 21 miles hysterical. And when I ran through the finish line, I don't think that I stopped crying actually for about an hour after. I knew at that moment that I had to make some small changes in my life, that things were not serving me. And this was my way of expressing it. I wish I would have stuck to my guns a little bit more, because I think if I had, I wouldn't have gone back through the cycle to lose my hearing. But know that, yes, running actually, this marathon was one of the biggest eye openers that something was wrong.
What triggered the crying? Do you remember? Because I think this is important for people to recognize what brought it on.
The beautiful thing about running, for anybody out there that doesn't run and those that are probably like, oh, I can't run or running is hard. Okay. The one beautiful part about it is sometimes when you are in a tough state like that, you're trying to get through it. If you go up and you resort to your mental, you start to think, the ability to just think clearly, you start to surface things that you don't want to tackle when you're sitting and you're just living your day to day.
Suppressed and pushed
everything
down
comes
and
to the
moved
surface.
Away.
So immediately what came to the surface was, how dare I let myself work the way that I work? How dare I never take a vacation without working? Why don't I have any personal time for myself? Would I ever let this happen to my loved one? No way. I would never let my son or my husband go through. I would be standing in front of them like, don't you dare let people take advantage of you this way. But I had clients pinging me in the middle of the night, sending me emails. No one was ever happy. I was letting people run all over me and it was all coming to the surface. I was so sad that I had treated myself that way in that moment, that I was hysterical. And that combined with the fact of, was there anything else for me? Was I going to even be able to get out of this, owning this agency, or was I stuck here forever? And I think just the feeling of, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. So when I was done, I tried to go put some boundaries in place. That was the first step. It's like, how do I put some boundaries in place? I did totally break those boundaries down, though. I didn't stick with them. But yeah, it was wild how it all came. And I was just so disappointed that I had failed myself. It was self-sabotage at its finest.
Do you feel some of the burnout? Because I think this is important for people to kind of really look at. Do you think it started back in your childhood? And people are going to be like, what? Why are you bringing up childhood when it comes to burnout?
Oh, you bet. I'll say 2 things about that. Absolutely. I think that I come from a family that kept me busy. I went from school to sport number 1 to sport number 2. It was this mentality in my household of, if you're busy, you won't get in trouble. You're going to be getting good grades. And that is it. It was also the feeling of always wanting to please my parents. And so even as an adult, in the moments of burnout with my business, if my mom or dad would be like, you're doing so great and I'm so proud of you and you're so successful, I'd get a surge of energy and be, nope, I got to stay the course. I'm 41. Why would that still matter? But yes, I think that it 100% goes back. I'd say that. And I think the other thing that I say in workshops a lot, that I get that sort of resistance moment from people, is a lot of burnout is our choices. We have the power to choose. We don't exercise it enough. And we do put ourselves in some of these situations. While burnout is sometimes uncontrollable situations, a lot of it is within our control.
It's a tough one for folks, isn't it?
It's a tough one.
It's a tough one when we have to face the reality of, the fear of setting boundaries or
Yeah.
making some changes and getting our worth and value by achieving, by accolades, by the acknowledgement,
Yeah.
likes. All of that feeds this insecure part of us that
Yes.
perpetuates this sense of, I need to keep going. I need to keep hustling. And we don't even think we're hustling. It's just such a conditioned part of us for
So
so
conditioned.
long. And then I'm wondering, in the marathons, was that part of your hustling? Has that been part of what you've had to reckon with, achieving more goals? I'm just curious about that piece.
This is so great. I appreciate these questions. Yes. It's so funny. This was supposed to be the sixth, right? These were 6 marathons. And then I started to find myself, well, what happens when they're over? Do I have other marathons? What else? And I had to stop myself the other day and say, Amy, get in the right lane and go slow for a little bit. You don't always have to be in the fast lane. So yes, it's still in my book. I wanted folks to know that burnout, number one, you're not going to heal it overnight. And this is lifelong work. And this is lifelong work for me. I literally have hit rock bottom and I am 90% better. I mean, I am really doing a lot better now, but just that question you asked me. Yes, of course, these were goals that I had to do. It's almost like, when will they end? Could they calm down some? Why do I always have to chase these large milestones? And yes, that was a big red flag the other day, was slow down. It's okay. It's okay to slow down.
And giving you that permission, because
Yes.
there's a payoff when we do well at something or we get accolades for it. There really is. There's this younger part of us that says, man, that feels so good, right?
Yeah.
If I do well at the job, if I do well in the marathons, if I achieve these goals. And it's hard for people to say, well, then what am I going to do? So what are some of the things that you've done to address one of the looking outside of yourself for pleasing others or the accolades? We have so much a part of us that just wants to feel good about ourselves. That's really a lot of what we're all struggling with. So what are some of the things and how do you find that inner peace to deal with the burnout?
I think the very first piece of it is being true to your authentic self. I think somewhere along the way, and it's so funny you bring up childhood because I think it could even happen earlier, but I think for a lot of us, somewhere in our teens, we just ditch our authentic self somewhere on the side. We're driving. It's just left on an exit. And then the next thing you know, college comes or whatnot, we enter jobs and we're starting to morph who we are and who we are at our core to meet the expectations of others. And then frankly, we're a fraud. We're a fraud to ourselves. And I think by far that's the worst. And so when I started my burnout work, my reflection period, it was like, let me go back to my own core values. What do I stand by? I mean, heck, there was even a period of time where, I don't drink alcohol. And there was a period of time where we moved to Chicago and that was the thing to do. And so I started to find myself drinking on Fridays. And then I would wake up the next day and it was not that I felt bad from the alcohol. I felt bad because it's not who I was. And so I think if we can strip back and we can go through, who do we want to show up as? What makes us tick? What are our purpose? What's our passion? If we can go through some of this authentic self, the work, if we can then feel really good about showing up as our authentic self, I think that's the pathway right there to being, okay, I'm empowered now to lead at work, lead at home, everything. From there, though, then we got to sit down and go, what did our time look like? How are we spending our time? I think I was blown away when I did about 45 days of time auditing coming off this burnout cycle. It was wild because you think about it and it's like, you don't get your time back. I think sometimes you say that out loud in whatever mindset, you're like, wow, it's not like you can go redeposit time onto your life. So I think it's really important for people to go through and take a week and say, where are you spending your time? For me, I could not believe that I was only giving myself 1 hour a day to myself. I think that alone, it's like a slap and wake up call, a slap in the face. Amy, wake up and take charge. So those two tactics are something I'd totally encourage folks to do, just to kind of get that feeling of it's time to take charge. I think both of those activities sort of wake you up in the right kind of way.
Yes. And we were talking about breath work. We did a couple of deep breaths. My
Yes.
audience knows I love the breath work. Took several deep breaths before we got started. Tell me about your journey with breath work, meditation. How has that played into helping you with burnout?
Oh my gosh. This is probably to me one of the most life-changing experiences. It's so funny because I don't think my family's bought in yet. So they're like, what is she doing? But I'll say that anybody out there that's really in the thick of burnout, it's a lonely place to be. You suddenly feel really lonely. There are things going on in your head that you are probably not sharing with even your biggest confidant. So then you have to go, where's my spirituality at this point? And for me, I kind of lost the connection with any higher being at all. At some point, you just have to believe something bigger than you has your back because you're heading into a deep depression if you're at the thick of burnout stage 5, where I was. And so for me, it was like, you are so busy. You're on back-to-back calls all the time. Can you just step away for 5 minutes, take some deep breaths, and try to just find peace in silence? That was the mission. It was just, how about we just sit in silence for a few minutes? But from that, it was so powerful to just be able to breathe, reset my nervous system. I remember having a couple of panic attacks where I stepped away from the computer. I sat down and I just did 5 breaths. And right there, I was like, it's going to be okay. And from there, I moved into every day at 2:00. Can I step away and just sit in silence and use the Headspace app to have like a guided meditation to be able to just focus on your breathing and not think in silence? It is the most powerful thing. I feel like from there, I was able to tap into a big spiritual component that was missing. And for listeners, I know this probably sounds so strange, but I remember waking up the next day after meditating for 5 days in a row and consistently doing breath work upon waking, midday, and right before bed. I suddenly had this feeling of everything was going to be okay. I had tapped into whatever higher power, somebody had my back. I didn't feel as lonely. And I was like, okay, this is my time to center myself. This is my time to tap into spirituality. And I think it is probably the most powerful thing anybody can do, for sure, especially if they're feeling lonely, like I described.
Yes, I think we're in a lonely epidemic right now where so many people feel like there's something wrong with them. They're defective. They're not good enough. So they feel they have to do these work so many hours. They don't feel safe enough to set boundaries. How have you been able to set boundaries for yourself? And tell me about your journey with that piece.
Boundaries are hard, everyone. And you are not going to do it right the first time. So one thing I like to always say is I like 1% improvements. What's 1% better each day? And that's sort of how I live. So the first step I did for boundaries is I paid attention for a few days of all of the stress triggers that were going on in my life. What was causing the anxiety? Sometimes we forget that part. So I remember waking up in the morning, having major anxiety when there was 5 new meetings on my calendar. I remember getting anxiety when I started to see the white space on my calendar reducing and back to back to back meetings loading up. I got anxiety when people would take my lunch break. I started to get that flustered feeling when I would get Slack messages all night long at all given hours, that I'm feeling of always on. And so I think the first bit for me was, what is causing the stress? Where is there an opportunity for a boundary? When I did that, I started small and I prioritized them to say, which one am I going to get the biggest bang for my buck right in my time if I put this in place? And I started really small by doing a no back-to-back meeting boundary. I wasn't going to do that anymore. And so what I would do is I would put little tiny spaces, blockers on my calendar for 15 minutes that would let people book 45-minute meetings, but they couldn't book an hour anymore. And they were not able to book 2 30-minute meetings anymore. It gave me a little bit of time to go do some breath work, go eat lunch, have a life beyond this. Go, 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 go. There was so much research I had read about the stress your brain goes through going to back meetings. So that was the action. But I think, folks, the biggest part is you have to communicate the boundary. So I had to reach out and kind of say to my team, I'm not going to be taking back-to-back meetings anymore. It's causing me a lot of stress and it's not allowing me to be as productive as I'd like to be. So going forward, if you notice that I have blocks, please respect those blocks. Then it was putting it into practice. So when folks would put the meeting over the block, I had to decline the meeting with a note that said, sorry, this is my blocked time. Here are some alternative times. Did I take a few meetings when I shouldn't have? Yes. Did I regret it immediately? Yes. And that then fuels you back to the top where you go, okay, I'm going to stick with this boundary. Boundaries are practice. Boundaries are for you. And boundaries are so important because every single time you can execute a boundary, I feel like you put on armor of resilience. You become more resilient and you become stronger to say no more often. And that's what we need in our lives. We have to be able to feel comfortable saying no and protecting our time. So I hope that was a good example of just kind of how I started, but I've put about 7 or 8 boundaries in place since then that I've stuck to very well.
Good for you. Because I think the sticking to it can get in the way sometimes. For example, my husband, I walked downstairs before our interview and he's laying on the couch. He's like, I feel so guilty. I go, why? You worked so hard this weekend. We volunteered at our daughter's event. And it's okay to take the rest, but the guilt from his childhood, we have to be productive all day or I'm lazy. That negative belief that if I'm not doing something, then I'm lazy. How do you work through your own guilt and shame that can come up from not being productive? Because we're so conditioned into be busy, be doing something, produce, hustle. How do you work through that?
What a great question. Well, first of all, I think we have to shift our own narrative. I think that rest is now part of your responsibilities, period. So if you want to be more productive, you would find tons of research out there to show you that if you do take time to rest, you will be more productive. All of this burnout hustle culture leads us to getting sick more often. We're getting burned out. We're getting depressed. We're starting to become cynical at work. We're losing our soul. And therefore, we are not going to be productive, period. So I think we have to do a better job at flipping the narrative. And I have to say, this was super hard. My mind was being like, you got to be at the computer. I had to start changing who I was paying attention to on like social media and content creators. I started to follow folks, Adam Scott, who has a really progressive mindset as it relates to productivity and work. He's got research about the 4-day work week. He's got a ton of advice about it's okay to take breaks. And so I think what we are absorbing also matters. And so for me, it needed to kind of be, okay, there are big thought leaders out there with research showing that this is okay. I started to do it and I started to see the benefits. And then when I was coaching clients to see their improvements, okay, I'm sold. And so I think this whole entire piece is another moment where you got to shift the narrative. And I think this is where journaling regularly is so helpful because you can go through and say, okay, this week I'm going to instill 2 rest breaks. You can totally track back to what your day looked like. Did you drop all these balls at work or did you actually feel recharged to tackle your day? And I think that's where the answer comes. So I just challenge all of you to practice rest. It needs to be practiced and the narrative needs to be changed. This one gets me a little feisty.
It does, because it affects us. When my husband said that, I said, who's the voice in your head telling you you're lazy? It's so important to examine, like, who is driving the bus? Is it you or is it somebody from your past? Not to blame them, to take your power back, to go, it's healthy for rest. That wasn't the message I got as a kid. And in order to be the best version of myself, I have to rest and take care of me. Yes. Often that's not the message we got. So I love asking, who's the voice in your head? And he was able to identify, oh, it's my mom. And I was able to say, yeah. And now you can say, you know, Mom, I can rest. And that's what I need in order to feel better and to do our jobs and to function. So I think it's important to identify that. The second piece is this idea of caregiving can be a lot of burnout for people. If we're caregiving our children, they need us and have a lot of needs. Our families, maybe someone's sick or a loved one's sick. How do you help people with burnout when they're caregiving and feel like it's hard to have other options?
That's another really tough one. I have a couple of self-care pillars that I like to have folks go through because at the end of the day, if you cannot fill up your own cup, you're going to be virtually useless to anybody you're caregiving with. The other thing is too, I think a lot for moms that are they're taking care of the kiddos. They always feel they have to be sacrificing everything for the kids. It's always so powerful when you see that transformation where they start to put themselves first and the kids see what they're doing. And they're like, wow. One of the best stories with one of my clients recently, who was a mom, literally had given up everything for her kids. She would not even take the help from her husband. She was just go, 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 every school event. But she wanted to start exercising regularly. And just to get her to do that was very, very difficult. But she started running. And she started to just do little by little. Do you know that the other day her daughter was at school and the teacher said, write down 3 goals you have for yourself. And the little girl wrote, gotta make my bed more often. I need to walk the dog and I want to start to run. If we remember that there is a reason why in an airplane, we have to put our oxygen mask on first to help other people, I think we can start to understand why this is so important. And so I really believe that anybody who's caregiving has to just find that one small moment or two each day to take out for themselves. And usually I recommend we fill it with something we love, and then we fill it with something that we can take care of us. And so I think once you start putting that in practice, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And then you've got the little kiddos that are seeing your example, which is amazing.
It is so true because at night, sometimes by 9 o'clock, I'm like, lights out. I'm fried. I can feel my body wanting to rest. And then kids want to come in and get the dog riled up. Not jumping on the bed, but everybody seems to find our bed as the base. And for a while, it was okay. And then I could feel myself getting irritated. Yeah. And then I just said, hey, I love you guys so much. And I love our time together. I can feel myself starting to get irritable. And I think that's my sign that I've got to rest and go to bed soon. And me owning that, I think empowers them to own what they need and advocate for themselves. I feel when we model what we're doing to advocate for ourselves, that gives them permission to do that in other relationships that they're going to carry on and carry out.
Yes.
To your example with your client.
I think it's so powerful. You're right. I do. I think taking accountability and just being, hi guys, this is my time right now. It's okay. Yeah, I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, because we feel guilt. Oh, I feel like I should be that should when we shame ourselves. I should be playing with the kids at 9 o'clock at night. And when I just gave myself permission to go, it's okay. And it's healthy for me to name it, let them know and communicate and acknowledge what they want and acknowledge what I want. It's an and in both.
It is. Yeah. I think that's fantastic.
I think that helps when you're feeling burned out. You feel like you have to go, 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 or you have to do these things. Change the narrative to your point. Do you really have to? Where's that coming from?
A lot of times the self-reflection is the winner in all burnout scenarios. If you can just stop and self-reflect, you oftentimes will identify that it's probably not necessary and you've created this from some place that it does not apply now. And I think the other thing, just to this point that makes me think of, is so often we get trapped in what we used to do, who we used to be. But seasons of life are magical in that we are not who we were even 5 years ago. We are not who we were in our 20s. And so getting to know ourselves regularly is another awesome self-reflection piece. Sit down and get to know yourself. Maybe you don't like the thing you liked 5 years ago. That's okay. And if you don't like this career path anymore, that's okay. Nothing is lost. You just carry it forward in a new season of life. And I think, especially you and I growing up, like that just didn't seem to be the way the narrative was. It was like, here are your options in school of what you want to be when you grow up. And there is the path. That's all you got.
Yes, I agree. And I'm wondering for you, you mentioned stages of burnout. What are the stages? And then where are you at in those stages?
I usually go through when I'm coaching to help folks identify where they might be in burnout. It is 5 stages. The first one's like the honeymoon stage. And I'm sure you can relate to this because this is actually the stage where we are willing participants of like diving into our job or diving into whatever we're doing full force. We thrive off the chaos. Oh yeah, I've got to cancel again. I've got another meeting because I'm trying to show my worth for whatever the goal is. Is it this job, this leader? I'm trying to be this great superhuman. And so that honeymoon phase, just like in marriage, wears off and you move into that onset of stress stage where you're starting to get those bouts of the juggling act. It's the imbalance starts to happen, right? You're starting to see, okay, too much has happened over here, a little bit bouts of unmanaged stress coming, and your phone battery, it's starting, too many apps are operating at that time. And I would say stage 3 is chronic stress. And that's where you noticeably are going to start to have changes maybe in your emotional, physical, mental health. You might start getting headaches every day at 2 p.m. You're canceling something with your husband because you got stuff going on. You've lost control now, probably of your boundaries completely. You're headed into that cycle like I am of service to whatever. I'd say the 4th stage is the onset of burnout. And that's where we're kind of, I love to think of this as quicksand. We're on the bridge right before the quicksand where we're almost falling in. And we know something's wrong, but we don't know how to get out. And because of that, we tend to start to have more on the mental health side. We might have anxiety coming more frequently. We might be depressed because something's got to change, but I don't know how. And the interesting part about stage 4 and stage 5 is you do reach a decision fatigue situation that is a real thing. It's little decisions become really hard to make. And so if you are faced with what does the future look like for me, it might be impossible for someone in stage 4 or 5 to even look for a new job. They can't process that. Their brain is so overloaded with everything going on, and they're probably completely not present at this time either. I know when I was in stage 4, my family started to be, Amy, it's like you're not here. You're not with us, even though you're here. Stage 5 is where we're in some trouble, right? It's probably our burnout moment, our rock bottom. For me, stage 5 looked like I had some major autoimmune health issues at that time. I was pretty much in deep depression. I had no idea. I didn't think anybody was there to listen to me, crying a lot. And also, I was starting to have nightmares, insomnia, a lot of physical symptoms. And so those are kind of how I break them down. I do have a checklist, though, on my website, and it's included with the book. You can kind of go through some of these questions and it will kind of give you where you might be and then kind of your path to go forward from there.
Where do they get the checklist?
Yes. And then your question, where am I now? I would say right now, I'm actually not in the stages of burnout any longer. I think we do escape the trenches. We have to understand those stages to know if we're going back through them. I would say a couple of months ago, I started to tiptoe back into the honeymoon stage, and I quickly realized you got to stop these behaviors. I was starting to do that, starting to do this again where I'm just going to go back to back for a couple meetings because I can get this out of the way. And that's the mentality I didn't want to bring back in my life. I also realized that I was having anxiety slowing down. The busy was going off, the busy. And so that was another indicator that I could be headed back into the trenches. But I'm safely what I call the burnout free bubble. I'm in there right now, and I plan to stay in there. Do not want to go back to the burnout zone.
What does the burnout free bubble look like for you?
The burnout free bubble for me looks like saying no a lot more often. Got some boundaries in place that are pretty non-negotiable for myself. And so that's number 1. Number 2 for my burnout free bubble is being true to myself always and making sure I'm living my purpose. And so for me, my purpose is, it was funny. I started my career off as an educator and I quickly moved into self-taught marketer. And then that was where I grew my agency and everything like that. When I did my self-reflection and my authentic self-work, I realized at my core, I am an educator. That is who I am. And after even getting feedback from others, they were like, you're a teacher. That's who you are. And so I think living out my purpose is really important. And so when I'm offered an opportunity now, I have to stop and ask myself, is this aligned with my future vision? Is this where I'm headed? So I'm there. I am a lover of rest now. So I try to spend a good amount of my day resting. I also start my day very differently than I used to. I don't start until about 9:30 or 10. I like to run, decompress, do some headspace meditation, eat my breakfast away from the computer. In my nighttime routine, it means that all my apps turn off at 8 p.m. It means I do not pick up my phone anymore for emails and Slack messages. I communicate that to others that this is not something that I'm going to do. I'm not available. If it's an emergency, obviously, you have to call me. But nothing is an emergency is what we realize. When we put boundaries in place, we realize that all the emergencies that once were really aren't emergencies. They can wait typically. The other thing I would say in my burnout free bubble is a more present person. I find myself decompressing off of social media a lot more. I don't want to be in the comparing, criticizing world that social media can bring. That also triggers my busy meter where so-and-so's doing this. I should probably pick it up. I've got to be busy or they look busy. So I really do have very set restrictions on social media. And when I'm eating with my family or I do Saturdays, no tech Saturdays now. But when I'm eating with my family, I go phone free. I want to be present for those moments. I want to hear what my family is saying to me and really listen and engage in conversations. That's what my burnout free bubble.
Those are a lot of what I do too. They're so powerful. I want to circle back to a couple of pieces that I think are important for the listeners.
Yeah.
One, did you get your hearing back? Because I'm curious, or do you still not have it?
My hearing will be gone forever.
Okay, so it was permanent.
It's permanent. Yep.
There's so much here. The second piece is the emotions. I believe emotions are essential to connecting, processing, nurturing. And if we don't, what are we running from? We have this metaphor. I mean, you're a runner. What are we running from and what do you want to run towards? So what do you think you were running from? Question I want the listeners to do might help to hear your perspective on what you might have been running from.
What I was running from during all of my burnout buildup.
Yes.
A couple of weeks ago, I don't know if I would be able to answer this for you. I can answer it today. So in my early 20s, I was an early mom, had my son when I was 20, and we had nothing to our name. It was a very disruptive period of time where I was scrambling to survive. And it's so funny. You ask Austin right now, what's one thing you remember when you were a kid? And he goes, the power going out. So I was a young mom. So I was scrapping to survive. I think what I was running from is not having anything, being able to support my family. I was so afraid. Any given moment, if I turned a client down, that the whole business the next day could go under and I would be back in that place.
Beautiful. Yes, that makes so much sense.
That's what I was running.
Yes. And so underneath burnout, I think is so much fear.
So much fear.
Fear of not having enough, fear of failing, fear of abandonment, rejection, fear of not looking stupid. I mean, the list goes on and on.
So much fear.
So much fear because you were in a survival state. It's important for people to recognize, am I in a survival state? In a survival state, think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We need electricity. We need food. We need shelter. And sometimes it's early in our lives, even we might have had experiences like that can lead us to burnout because we never want to experience that again.
Yes. And that's where even faith has got to come in. You've got to have the faith to say, hey, I'm making this leap away from this business now. And I trust and will do the action necessary to get me forward. Because you're right. Any given moment, I would ready to make the right decision. I'd go back to that fear. I can't. The family, we're going to be scrapping again. We can't do this.
And I don't want to do that. I won't do that. And so that survival instinct says, your protector part says, we got to go. We got to do it. We got to keep running. We got to keep going. Right? It's so powerful. So I really want an audience to hear and ask yourself, what am I running from? And what am I trying to run towards? So what do you think you're running towards now?
You know what is the most interesting part is it's almost complete, in some ways, it's the complete opposite. Obviously, I don't want to have to scrape anymore, but in this whole experience, I really am minimalism. It's made me really think to myself, all the money you were bringing in, what did it do at the end of the day besides deteriorate your health and make you lose moments with your family? The answer really is, there's not one material thing that I own that even is worth it. I would take my hearing back and give up everything. So what I am trying to understand and appreciate is I'm doing just fine in this slower right lane of the traffic. I'm driving my own car there just fine. And I am driving towards a more minimal life that's filled with greater connections, not all the stuff you have to have or all the societal norms of things that make you successful, driving them towards a minimalistic approach.
And letting people pass you on the road. And
That's fine.
Okay. You're like, it's okay. Go ahead. Go around me. Go on. And when you are unattached to that outcome and letting go of the stuff, you realize what matters most, which connection.
So much.
Yes. It's like so deep. And I think that is so important to when we're looking at burnout. You had some grief in the middle of it. You lost your hearing. That is a lot of grief and loss. When we lose a sensory part of ourselves, it's grief. And I want to acknowledge that for you, for one. And two,
Thanks.
When you're doing this work of working through the burnout, it's okay. You're going to have grief bursts. You might have some things that you didn't process from the past that need to come forward and come out. You running and crying. I'm like, you go, girl. I know it was probably really overwhelming for you, but I know then there's things moving when we're feeling.
Yes.
We're moving through the burnout then.
Yeah, it's oftentimes when change needs to happen, you do need those moments of acknowledgement or admitting it to yourself. And that crying was a big admitting to myself, something's not right.
It was your
Gotta
body
change.
begging you to release and you couldn't stuff it down. It wasn't possible. I'm running and I'm crying because you couldn't put it back in. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
you
I
bet.
think that's really big. What are the 3 biggest takeaways you've learned about burnout that could be helpful for the audience?
The first one is that when you're feeling burnout, I want you to go back and see you causing the burnout from the choices you're making. And remember that the greatest power we have is the power to choose. We get to choose not only the choices sometimes, but the way that we react to things, our attitudes toward things, we get to choose. And so that's number one. That's what I've learned about burnout is I was to blame for a lot of it. I could have gone back and erased some of that. Number two, I would say I've learned that when we are on the other side of burnout, we realize that a lot of the stuff we were doing wasn't even worth it. And so in order to understand that more in a current state, it's just really, really looking at your time and seeing what are you giving up? What are you sacrificing? Who is taking your time and energy? And then that would actually cascade me into my third biggest revelation. I talk about it in my book in its own chapter, but I call them energy vampires. We really have to understand who our tribe is. And when we are in the thick of burnout and we are struggling, we realize that even some of our loved ones, like our mom and our grandma, might be an energy vampire at that moment in time. And so I think understanding who is stealing our energy away and not giving anything back in return is really important. And I know that experience for me has helped me to create additional boundaries where I can still have relationships with some of these people, but they're more protected relationships because I know that too much of that relationship, they're going to suck energy away from me and I'm going to be left depleted and starting to get again back in that wave of going back to childhood. I need to do go, 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 go. And actually, it's really funny. I was listening to a book the other day on my run and I had listened to 4 chapters of it and something about the guy's mentality being that he didn't rest. He didn't believe in rest. He didn't believe in tapering after a workout session. I said to my husband, I can't listen to this anymore because this is the opposite of where I'm headed. So we just have to really be cognizant of who's taking our energy and what we're surrounding ourselves with.
Yeah, that's beautiful. You're able to recognize that doesn't align with your beliefs anymore.
It started to get anxious again.
Yeah, noticing that feeling in your body. I can imagine that sleep and your sobriety, being sober, also contributes to not being burned out. Fair to say from your experience?
One of the things that I cherish the most is sobriety, I will say, because I just feel I always get a good picture of who I am and how I feel all the time without that layer of it. And also it does allow me just naturally to feel I'm living a more healthy lifestyle overall. I think I'm making healthier choices about what I'm eating and what I'm putting in my body. And I think if we're trying to change the narrative, sometimes that's really positive. because it does promote rest. It does promote movement in our body and those healthier choices. And I would say my Achilles heel now is not enough sleep. So I'm kind of a stickler for the 9 p.m. lights out, 5 a.m. early riser, because I do feel waking early and starting your day is a nice way of just getting slowly started, and it's quiet. So sleep, you've got to sleep.
It's essential to emotional, mental wellness. I mean,
oh my
when
gosh,
we're giving a lot, we feel sometimes we can't help it. But if we are mindful of our sleep and kind of like tuck yourself into bed, because it's so important. I'm trying to get my kids in that mindset too. And they notice now, say, how do you feel when you didn't get sleep? And I didn't feel good.
No.
My brain didn't work that well.
No.
I felt sluggish. And I think that can lead us to feeling burned out in whatever we're doing as well. And then when we're self-medicating with alcohol or other vices like social media, I mean, we all have something we turn towards. It can be an energy, I like you called energy vampire as well. So just noticing that and then having our self-compassion for all that we're dealing with now. I mean, when we can go, you know what, this isn't easy and it's okay that I'm sad sometimes. And it doesn't make me a bad person if I don't get XYZ done today. The laundry, the dishwasher unloaded, the house isn't clean. Whatever it is for you, whatever that looks like, it's okay.
Yeah, I think that last statement bleeds right into even the idea that some folks do use alcohol to push the problem aside. It only pushes it aside for a little bit, right? And it's there the next day. And I think what you just said, it's try to face it. It's okay if it's hard. It's going to be hard, but being more present to solving it is going to actually be where the change lies. And I think a lot of times when we're self-medicating or even down to our sleep, I remember being in the thick of burnout, using natural sleep aids to be able to sleep. Had I just sat and addressed the issues at hand, the sleep came naturally after that, right? Like I addressed them. I haven't had a nightmare since. I haven't had insomnia since.
Yeah, because you faced it. You processed
it. Yeah.
It's so key. So this has been such a wonderful conversation. Where can people find you, Amy, if they want to know about your book, the checklist that you mentioned? Where can people find you?
You can follow me on Instagram at Project Amy. That is a great place just to keep up with everything. And then my website, amymangueira.com. And I'll make sure you have all the links because the spelling of that can be tricky, but mangueira.com. And that's where everything will be. Book launch, all the information and all my checklists will be there too.
So go grab the book, The Path to Break Free from Burnout. My name on my company is Pathways to Healing Counseling. So I love pathway. I'm a big
Yes, I love
the path. We want to be on the path. So thank you so much, Amy, for your heart, soul, energy. I so appreciate you being on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to the Close the Chapter podcast. My hope is that you took home some actionable steps along with motivation, inspiration, and hope for making sustainable change in your life. If you enjoyed this episode, click the subscribe button to be sure to get the updated episodes every week and share with a friend or a family member. For more information about how to get connected, visit Kristen, Kristen, Boyce, BOICE.com. Thanks and have a great day.